Hello, everybody, and welcome to the official Stephen King Tiermaker chart. I started reading Stephen King at the beginning of 2020, and what do you know, the year had plenty of time to get some books read. This list features every Stephen King book, including all of his novels, all of his short story collections and novella collections, as well as his standalone novellas, and two of his nonfiction pieces. You will not find any copies of his baseball books here. This does not include the book Later, which is due to be released in 2021. As we go through this chart, our categories are: top of the tier is Emperors of Ice Cream, number 2 is Quartet Worthy, 3 is Member of the Losers Club, 4 is There's Other Worlds Than These, 5 is Under the Dome, 6 is Captain Trips, and finally our lowest category is Deadlights. As I go through, this is not necessarily a look at what is the best written novel and what is the most popular novel and necessarily what is my favorite novel, but rather a combination of all of those. There will be some obvious choices. There will also be some disagreements. I'm going to try to go through these as quickly as possible to make sure that I can get them all in under 30 minutes. So sit tight, and here we go. These are going to be in chronological order by publication date, more or less. I might have flipped one or two, so let's get started. At the beginning, Stephen King started with Carrie. Most people know the film, but the novel was actually the first thing he wrote. I would put this one in There Are Other Worlds Than These. It's totally fine. It's fun to read. It's non-linear, though it's probably not one of his most well-known. Emperors of Ice Cream, conveniently, is going to be one of my top choices. Salem's Lot. I know it doesn't score as high with some others, but I thought it was one of my favorites. Next up is Rage. Rage is unpublished today. I found a copy of the PDF online. It is interesting. I'm going to put it under the dome. It's very short, and it certainly is problematic today, but it definitely has a compelling story. Everybody knows The Shining. The Shining is great. The Shining doesn't quite make it to that top tier for me. It's totally fine. It gets the job done. It's definitely a story that's a little bit more complicated than the movie, but probably not top tier. The Stand is right up there as well. I could easily put Stand in the Emperors of Ice Cream, but I'm going to save that just a bit. In fact, the more I look at it, I'm going to bump The Shining down just a bit to the Losers Club level. Night Shift is his first short story collection. It's totally fine. It gets the job done. I'm just not that big of a fan of short stories, so I'm going to put it down here in Under the Dome. The Long Walk is probably my second favorite of his Richard Bachman books. There are about 5 or 6 books here Stephen King published under another name, which of course was later revealed to be him. The Long Walks being number 2, I'm going to put that in the Losers Club. Now, The Dead Zone is one of my favorites. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the connection to politics. Maybe it was just the surprise of it. Maybe it's that it's horror without horror. I'm going to put it right up here in the Emperors of Ice Cream. Firestarter is functional. It reminded me of one of the lesser X-Men movies. It gets the job done. I'm going to say that There Are Other Worlds Than These. Dance Macabre really didn't do it for me. I understand what it was trying to be. It was more of a review of what he's done, a look at some elements of horror, but perhaps it was just written too early in his career and a little bit too dry for my liking. Roadwork was my favorite of the Richard Bachman books. I'm going to put it right up here with The Stand. Definitely not as good as The Stand, but definitely better than The Long Walk. Cujo, excellent novel as well, probably just a little bit better than The Shining, a little bit worse than The Stand. We're going to put it here. The Gunslinger, very controversial book. It's hard to say where to put it. It's almost like a rejected prologue to the Dark Tower series. I'm going to say that for The Gunslinger, I'm going to put it at the bottom of the Losers Club. It's functional. It's fine. A little bit bizarre, though. Doesn't quite jive with the other stories. Next up, we've got The Running Man. The Running Man's a real sort of generic story. I'm going to say There Are Other Worlds Than These. It was adapted into a film that is nothing like the book itself. But it's a fun little story here. Different Seasons, probably one of the most popular of his novella collections. Not my favorite, but definitely up there as Quartet worthy. The Pet Cemetery, Stephen King said this was either his scariest book or favorite book, depending on how you're interpreting it. I'm going to say this is right up there, maybe above Different Seasons, but in the Quartet worthy club. Cycle of the Werewolf, I just didn't care for it. I understand what it was trying to do. It's super short, has some pictures in it, tells the story of the werewolf returning each month, but just didn't stick with me. Christine, excellent story. I'm going to put this in the Losers Club with The Car Comes to Life. Definitely more about the characters than about the ending, which is rather weak. The Talisman is really well done. I read this entire thing in one day. I'm going to put this at the back of the Quartet worthy group. Eye of the Dragon gets a lot of hate. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm going to put it at the top of the Losers Club. I know a lot of people were a little upset when it came out. They thought it was a departure from his usual work, but I thought that it was a really engaging story. I think he does really well with this genre, and he clearly refined it as he got more through the Dark Tower there. Thinner, it might be one of my lesser favorite ones of the Richard Bachman books. We're going to put it down here that there are other worlds than these. Just sort of your classic cursed story. I know a lot of people like this one, but it just didn't stick with me. Skeleton Crew is the story in which the Mist appears, and the Mist is another one of those. I thought it was fine. It was probably better than his Night Shift collection, but it really just didn't stick with me all that well. It, no surprise here, it is one of the best Stephen King books written. In fact, of the ones so far, it's clearly at the top. I don't know if it's my all-time favorite, but it definitely belongs with The Emperor of Ice Cream. The drawing of the three is tricky. I could easily put this in Emperors of Ice Cream. I'm going to put it, though, down here in Quartet Worthy just short because I want to save a few more of those slots for later in the Dark Tower series. But this is where the Dark Tower series really gets going. We meet our characters and we get some of the bizarre nature of where the tale is going to go. Misery is sort of this underrated. It's sort of the bottom of the top tier or the top of the second tier for me, but it really puts you in that first-person position with our author. Tommyknockers. I didn't hate it. I'm not going to put it down there super low. I know it's at the bottom of a lot of people's list. I'm going to put it just under the dome and in the second half. But it's an interesting tale. I kind of like the first two-thirds of it before it falls apart. I did not like the dark half. I don't know what it was. It's not in the least category, but to me it was just very odd, very generic. I felt like I had read it before, even though it was the first of its type. Maybe it's because I read The Outsider first, but the dark half, for whatever reason, just did not do it for me. 4 Past Midnight is my favorite of the novella collections. I'm going to put it right up here at the top of Quartet Worthy, and I think you could make a case for it being in Emperors of Ice Cream, but I don't know. Novellas maybe just don't quite get there for me. But The Langoliers is probably my favorite novella so far. Needful Things. I could put Needful Things in Emperors of Ice Cream as well. It does go on a little long. We'll put this maybe number 2 in the Quartet Worthy Club. The Wasteland I will put up here in the Emperors of Ice Cream, one of my favorites from the Dark Tower series, perhaps even my favorite as I go through this list, but this is where the story really locks in with our characters and we start our adventure. Gerald's Game, very well done, probably not as good as Dolores Claiborne, which is coming up next, so as a result I'm going to put it right here below Eye of the Dragon in the Losers Club, but considering you just have a single person in a single room, this story is very compelling. Dolores Claiborne, a huge departure. It's simply one character narrating the whole time. I'm going to put it at the sort of the back here of the Quartet Worthy Club, but a very interesting departure there. Nightmares and Dreamscapes, totally functional, serviceable. I can't think of anything that really stood out to me as being super memorable, so I'm going to put it down here right in the middle. Insomnia. Now, I could go back and forth on whether I want to make it or Insomnia my favorite story. I think I'm going to put Insomnia, though, at number 1, just to shake it up a bit. I know a lot of people have it as their top story, but to me, Insomnia was one of the favorite books I read. I know it's not always a fan favorite. I know Stephen King didn't even care for it, but I really liked the connection with the Dark Tower world. Rose Madder, one of the most forgettable stories out there. I'm going to put this above the dark half, I suppose. It wasn't necessarily terrible, but just didn't really do anything for me. Next up, we have The Regulators. I don't know what it was, but this story to me just did not work. I think it was maybe too bizarre. Maybe I just went over my head. Maybe it was in that in-between period where he wasn't doing great with the writing. At least that's what a lot of people say. But there's really, I just couldn't get into it. I had to almost skim through it. Desperation, the companion story, totally functional, fine, got the job done. At least it had a plot that sort of made some sort of sense, but that's about all I can say. Continuing, we have The Green Mile. A lot of people know this movie. They love this movie. The book is good. I'm going to put it right at the bottom of the Losers Club. It's not terrible. It's not great. I thought it was fine. I don't know that it necessarily lives up to the hype of the film. Wizard in Glass is tricky. It's an interesting story. I like the world. I like the setting, but it really doesn't fit with the rest of the story. It's an extended prequel. So as a result, I'm tempted to put it down here again at the back of the Losers Club because it was a disappointment. Imagine waiting all that time and then getting the Wizard of Glass, which really doesn't advance the story. Bag of Bones is tricky. I didn't enjoy reading it. I didn't really like it, but I could tell it was really good. It's one of the ones I'm most interested in reading again. So I'm going to put it right up here below Pet Sematary because I think, even though I didn't like it, I think it's way better than I thought. Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, yeah, it was okay. It was at least short. It was 200 some pages. I got through it in one sitting, but it really didn't do all that much to me. Hearts in Atlantis, one of my favorite short story collections, I would say. So I'm going to put this right up here at the top of the Losers Club, probably below my novella collections, but a lot of good things here, and I like how these all sync together, and they have some solid Dark Tower connections. On Writing is an excellent story. It's nonfiction. It's definitely not a novel that you want to read, but I'll put this at the bottom of Caught-Tedworthy, an excellent piece. Now, so far, this is very top-heavy, and we notice we have a lot of stuff at the top and less at the bottom. I think that's all about to change. We get to a period here where I don't care for much of his work, including Dreamcatcher. Dreamcatcher, to me, has to go right down here near the bottom in Deadlights. It was almost a worse version of Tommyknockers for me. I know a lot of people have this at the bottom of their list. And Black House, while I really like the Talisman, and I like that Black House has those connections, I'm going to put Black House down here and Under the Dome. It just didn't work out so well. From a Buick 8's an interesting concept. I just appreciated it for the concept, but it's right below average. It's just a story about stories, a series of interconnected short stories without a real explanation, and sort of lacks of an ending. Everything's Eventual, again, a totally functional short story collection. I'm going to put it right next to Nightmares and Dreamscapes. To me, they both sort of melded together the same. Wolves of the Kala. I could easily put this right up there with The Wasteland. I'm going to put it down here, though, just below Needful Things, I think. And then Song of Susannah. This gets a lot of hate, but I'm going to put this just above Wolves of the Kala. I thought it was such an interesting concept. And finally, Stephen King's Dark Tower. This one's tricky. I really liked the end, but it was just so long. They did so many things in this one. So I'm going to put this down just below, maybe just below The Stand. So The Wasteland is up here. Again, some of these are interchangeable. I could really have almost any of these 3, 5, 6, and 7 for the Dark Tower. I think it's easily the best series, and if we're taking the average of everything, this is the best fantasy series that I've read. The Colorado Kid gets a lot of hate. A lot of people don't like it because it's a mystery story that really doesn't have a mystery, but I thought it was such an interesting concept. I'm going to put it right up here in the Losers Club. Cell, and again, another one of those terrible stories that I just kind of pushed through and didn't like. We'll put it down here in the bottom few. Lisey's story is one of Stephen King's favorites, and for whatever reason, it just didn't connect with me. I think I need to read it again, perhaps when I'm older, but for whatever reason, it sort of just went over my head. Blaze, it just felt like a forgettable Bachman book. It reminded me of Mice and Men, intentionally so. I just didn't care for it. And Doomakey was better than I thought, so I'm going to put it up in Under the Dome. At least it had a more interesting concept than the past couple, but again, really didn't stand out that much. Just After Sunset is, again, another short story collection, and there really wasn't much that was left with me on this one. So I feel like I'm going to have to put it below Everything's Eventual, so put it up here just a little bit above Tommyknockers. Under the Dome, Not to Worry, is better than Under the Dome. I think Under the Dome is probably one of his last great epic stories with that scope and sequence, so we're going to put it up here in Caught-Tedworthy. Definitely better than the Talisman, probably a little bit worse than the Dark Tower, so we'll put it right there. We've got Full Dark, No Stars, probably to me his worst novella collection, but still I always prefer his novella collections to his short story collections, so we'll put this in Under the Dome, just before the Just After Sunset. 11/22/63 is tricky. A lot of people know this. They like the concept, and I really like the concept. I like the first third of this book. I like the ending of this book a lot. But then there's a lot in the middle where we just focus on the character living life in the 60s. I think there's a nostalgia factor that I just wasn't really able to tie into. So I'm going to put this one at the bottom of Caught-Tedworthy. I could also put it in top of the Losers Club, but it's definitely better than Colorado Kid. A Wind Through the Keyhole is a fun story. I'll put this at top of the Losers Club. It doesn't really advance the plot all that much when it comes to the Dark Tower, but it was probably nice at the time to get sort of a refresh there. Dr. Sleep's an interesting concept. I liked it. To me, it was right solid in the middle, so I'll put it just below A Green Mile. It was a nice, easy read to get through. Joyland, totally forgettable story. I'm going to put it down here at the bottom. Nothing wrong with it. Again, it's a good beach read. It is a summer book, I suppose. really fits that hard case crime theme, but probably not one of the best. The Mr. Mercedes trilogy, I just really didn't care for. I don't think they were badly written. I think the first one was probably the best of the crew. So we'll put this one, I need to put it below Carrie, definitely. So we'll put it right here, right there in the middle. Revival was a surprise. Revival was probably one of my favorite stories, right up there with Salem's Lot, The Dead Zone, and Misery. In fact, I'll put it just above The Dead Zone. It was so interesting. After a couple of slogs to get through, we finally had something that stood out here. Finders Keepers, I kind of thought a little bit worse than Mr. Mercedes, maybe a little bit better than Firestarter. We'll put it right here in the middle of Other Worlds Than These. Bazaar of Bad Dreams, another one of those, to me, forgettable short stories. Again, there are, in all of these collections, there are a couple good ones. I'll put it right up there with Just After Sunset. Finally, End of Watch, probably my least favorite of the few. I'm going to put this right down here near Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Just a couple more to go. We've got Sleeping Beauties, which to me was a worse version of Under the Dome, so I have to put it below that. It's, again, your classic tale of a town falling apart, Sleeping Beauties. So we'll go ahead and put this in. It's getting challenging as I go through here. I think it was just long and really didn't do all that much. Maybe right above or below Carrie. I could go in either direction. We'll put it here. The Outsider is actually the second Stephen King book I read. The first was It. The second was The Outsider. And then I kind of read everything in between. And when I read it, there were a lot of concepts that didn't stick with me at first. But the more I read his other stuff, the more I appreciated it. So I'm going to actually go ahead and put The Outsider definitely below. I'll put it right up here by Christine. I think that might be one of its best collections. Elevation is a novella, and it's kind of cringy, at least by modern contexts. I guess it was short, which kind of benefited it, so I could put it in the Deadlights. I could put it in the Captain Trips. I'm going to put it right there at the bottom of Captain Trips. Then we've got Gwendy's Button Box. I liked it. It was real simple. It didn't set the world on fire, but it's a nice little tale. So I'm going to put this right up here, maybe with just above Wizard and Glass, because I would definitely read this story again just because it was interesting. Finally, when I read these stories, like I said, I started in January. I finished every book by June 30th, but there were two more I couldn't get to. Once The Institute finally came out on paperback, I took a look at these last two books. The Institute, to me, was a little disappointing. I expected something more similar to the X-Men. Instead, I got something more similar to Black House. So The Institute I'm going to put right near Firestarter, which I felt was probably the most similar. Here we go, right in the middle of There Are Other Worlds Than These. And finally, If It Bleeds, I thought had some very interesting stories. It did connect to the Mr. Mercedes trilogy and Holly Gibney. However, definitely below Langoliers and Different Seasons. As a result, we'll put it right here at the top of the Losers Club. So there you have it, my tiered ranker chart. We've got 7 at the top, we've got 5 at the bottom, and in the middle we've got 16, 16, 14, 9, and finally 6 in that Captain Trips category. If I were to do this video a second time, I'm sure there would be some shifts, but I don't know. I think those Emperors of Ice Cream will remain my favorites for a good bit of time. But what do you think? Take a look at some of the novels, take a look for yourself, and maybe once you've read all 73, come on back and make your own tier maker for Stephen King. Thanks for stopping by.